Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Review 725. Today we're going to take a look at Descent: Legends of the Dark. Now this is the new game from Fantasy Flight Games that's kind of sort of a sequel to the second edition of Descent, although it's a lot different. And so this review is going to be structured a little bit differently than my typical reviews. The last couple of reviews I did for Kill Team from Games Workshop and Oath from Leader Games have all kind of sent me sideways in a lot of different ways, and I'm kind of changing up the format a little bit, not like permanently, but just for special cases. And this is definitely a special case. There's a lot going on in this game in terms of what they've decided to change about kind of your typical approach to a dungeon crawl style game. And so I'm going to have a bunch of timestamps below the video. And if you want to jump to some specific part of this is basically going to kind of sort of work itself out to be like a top 10 list, but not in the way that you might think. I'm going to go over basically 10 points and talk about the pros and cons of each side. So I'm going to go through these 10 things, and then I'll have kind of a little summary at the end, but going through the 10 things, you'll have an impression of what I think of the game overall. So let's jump into, first of all, before I start the 10, this is not a dungeon crawl like I think most people think of. It's not like Descent, second edition. It's not like Hero Quest or Warhammer Quest or any of that kind of thing. It's more like Journeys Through Middle-earth or Mansions of Madness second edition, although there's a bunch of dungeon crawling type of stuff that's going on in the game as well. So let's just jump into the first thing that kind of sets it apart from all the typical dungeon crawls and kind of marries it more closely to a Mansions of Madness second edition or Journeys of Middle-earth, and that is the story. And I will say unequivocally, I'm just going to jump right into this sucker. This is the absolute best 100% story game that I have ever played in terms of a tabletop board game experience, without question in my mind. In terms of just the storytelling side of it, there's a lot of really interesting kind of moral or personality choices that the characters make, and they do 100% affect the gameplay later on in the campaign. I should say I finished the whole campaign. But there's such a richness here to how the plot unfolds and how the different people are involved that I just want to open up right away and say 100% best story in a board game whatsoever, period, hands down. And I'll talk more about this in probably a little bit more detail on some of the other points. But there is one kind of sort of caveat I want to put to my statement of this is the best story. Sometimes there are what feels like little meaningless types of things that will happen. Not a ton, and it actually seemed more meaningless early on in the campaign. But when I got to the end of it, I was like, okay, wow, they really are kind of coloring in and filling in a lot of the blanks, leaving some of the little details there for you to sort of fill in yourself in a way. Because there's certain points where you're like traveling along the map and you'll run into like a random encounter, and really all that is generating some extra resources to use for crafting as you're going through your adventure. But those little kind of like solid little, I don't know, breadcrumbs really kind of flesh out the world building and that kind of stuff. And so it all kind of comes together at the end of the campaign feeling like you really been in this place, in this certain realm of Tyranoth, and kind of been through something in terms of what the story is and how it unfolds. But it can feel like a little bit meaningless in certain cases, but where it really matters, it doesn't feel meaningless at all. And like I said, some of the character choices and things that you can make in either little story-driven events or parts of your little adventure, dungeon crawl parts of the campaign, that will show up later on. And even though some of it doesn't necessarily show up in a super concrete way, some of it certainly does, but it's still, like, at the end of the day, once you're done, you're like, okay, I feel like all of these things have been really rounded out and well fleshed out. So that's the story. That's just a massive, massive plus, and it's probably, honestly, the biggest plus of this game. With all the other things going on in this game, the story is the biggest part of it for me. So that'll bring us to our second point, and that is the app itself, because it's an app-driven game. And the app actually facilitates the storytelling in a way that I think, normal traditional components aren't quite capable of. But the app also does a lot of other really, really cool things. One of the things it has is actually like a line of sight tool. So if you're in the app and you can see where your characters are positioned or where the enemy character is positioned, you can tap in there, use a line of sight tool and see, oh, do these two have line of sight to each other in these spaces? Because sometimes with all the terrain and stuff that you can see, it can be a little confusing to say, oh, okay, do these corners match up in that? So you can just go ask the app and it instantly will tell you, yes, these two can see each other, or no, they can't. And that's a really neat thing. The other thing the app you can do is adjust the difficulty level throughout the course of the campaign. Now, it's not something I made use of, but that's really a neat thing, because if you want to just make it easier and be more about the story and kind of just going through the journey of the thing and not worry too much about winning and losing the scenarios, you can make it easier. If you feel like it's too easy, then you can ramp it up a couple of levels, and that will really, I mean, it's just a really cool way to keep flexible and kind of tailor the experience to whoever's sitting at the table. There's a couple other things that it does, as it maintains a pretty decent quest log. So if you want to go back and say like, hey, what did that NPC tell us? And you can pull up the log and just go read it real quick. Or some of the scenarios will have more of a puzzle-driven, clue-driven type of solution that you need to go through. And you need to go back and look and say, okay, so this means this and this means that. So you need to kind of really study that. And having that, being able to pull that up really quickly in the app, you don't have to like take any notes or anything like that. That's really, really cool. And then one other thing the app does is, we'll talk more about this in the terrain section, but the way the app sort of presents rolling out the terrain, and this is kind of ubiquitous across all the Fantasy Flight apps, but I wanted to make note of it because the terrain can be pretty complex here in some cases. And the way it sort of slowly rolls stuff out to you, it makes it easy to sort of build up whatever sort of scene that you're setting up. You know, do these couple of tiles here, set this token, do that here to put the monsters. And it does it in a way that it's very conducive to the storytelling in terms of revealing like what's happening, you know, what happened when you opened the door and saw what you saw and that kind of stuff. So it does a really good job of that. Now I will say, I ran into a couple of hiccups with the app. The app on my iPad was basically down for 24 hours a few days ago, and there was just a bug they had, and they fixed it, and then it was back up and running. I didn't lose any of my save data or anything like that. I did see, I think, 2 or 3 crashes over the course of about a 26-hour campaign, but the amount of time that I lost we're talking like 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes of time. We just had to roll it back, and it never crashed during like, you know, the adventure part where you're doing combat and things like that. It was just kind of moving from one sort of position to the next in the map, and I maybe missed out and had to redo like a quick little story event or something. Not really anything to write home about, but there were some hiccups, and you know, it was down for 24 hours. I was a little bit nervous in that case. Now, one big kind of knock for the app is, in certain cases, like when you want to go pull up the log and read it, somebody's going to need to take the app away from the table where you have it presented and take it and read and spend some time, and then maybe you pass it to somebody else. So that will kind of halt gameplay a little bit. So that can happen. And you know, there's no voiceover at all, and I think that's probably one of my main criticisms of the game in general. I think there really should be voiceover, or at least the option to have it, because sometimes there's a lot of reading back to back, right? You'll be like, 2 characters will be having dialogue, and then you'll have some reading, and everybody reads at a different pace, right? So that's a little bit tricky. So you're like, everybody done, click, everybody done, click, everybody done, click, you know, and so that can be a little bit kind of annoying and stuff like that. But you know, that just comes up periodically. It's not like it's a constant throughout the whole campaign. And the other thing is, I played on my iPad. And I did fire it up on my phone, and absolutely I would never play this on a phone, even if I was just playing it solo, just because it's so small and it's just not conducive to a phone. So you really need like a tablet or a way to sort of broadcast it from your phone onto a larger monitor or TV screen. Anyway, so that's the app. So the next one I want to talk about is the terrain. Now the terrain is amazing. It's amazing. And one thing, this stores all of the terrain. So you have this bottom part of the box. Everybody's probably seen that. And then you have the game stuff in here. And all the terrain and tiles and stuff can be here on the bottom. And it's really actually fairly easy to kind of organize it. I mean, it's not like really organized, but I've sort of piled stuff in different piles. So, you know, all my doors are in this corner and that stuff. So it's easy to kind of pull that stuff out, set it up, and then get going. And the terrain can get really intricate and really neat. And one of the coolest things about the game is you're not just like in a cave or in a castle or in a dungeon or in a thing. You're moving from place to place. So you might be outside, then you're inside, or you're in like a little town square, and then you go into a tavern, and then over here into a lab, or into these different environments. So the environments are shifting back and forth, and this system here that they've come up with allows you to go in and out of these different environments, and that is just such a cool thing. I mean, it's such a simple thing that's so well presented here. It's just, to me, it's a friggin' achievement what they've done. Now, I will say when I first saw the game and saw kind of like the artwork on the tiles and the terrain, I was like, ugh, it's a little bit flat. And it is. But I don't know. The terrain pieces themselves, I think, are fine art-wise. The tile art on the tiles, that could be better. I'll be honest with you about that. But to me, it's such like a minor nitpick after playing through the rest of this game. And because of what I just talked about in terms of moving from environment to environment and that kind of thing, and setting up just really, really neat tactical scenarios. I mean, I don't want to spoil things, but there are certain things where friggin' the terrain matters. And the interaction and the marriage of not just like the combat tactics of the terrain, but which NPCs you have to interact with in all of these kinds of different ways, and where you have to be and where the monsters might be moving around, and the different sort of environmental underlays, like there might be lava and stuff, or spike traps and stuff like that. And you might have to like go up on balconies and all kinds of different stuff. I mean, they didn't just be like, let's do this like little kitschy terrain thing that looks neat, and it's like just kind of a thing. They like said, we're going to do terrain, and they went for it, and they really, really explore the space with it, like really explored it. And it just is so, so awesome. Now, bad part of that, it can take up a absolute ton of table space. Now I play here on this, it's a game topper, so it's like a, nice game table with the Watson, and it's, if you know the game toppers, the Watson size I think is the second biggest, or it's pretty close to the biggest. So it's not it's no slouch, right? You could not play this on a kitchen table, like a normal one. If you had a giant one, some people have a big kitchen table. We just have like a little one here, and I couldn't even play it. I could not play it on my kitchen table whatsoever. So like a normal kind of gaming table, no chance. Now the thing is, you could use the app. This would be not an ideal experience, but you can see the app sort of maintains what all the terrain looks like. So if you run out of room, you could take a chunk of it, like these two rooms, set it off to the side, or just tear it down, and then make your room and then keep going. Now sometimes we will have to like go back, backtrack and go talk to this person or kill these monsters, which came in here, or whatever. So you might have to set it back up. But there are certain times when you could probably just tear it down, and it's not going to affect the game because you're just kind of moving forward. But you can always refer to the app and say, okay, well now we have to move back a room or something. We could go kind of set that up or something. So you could do that. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be a big drawback for people, because it literally, I swear to you, like it takes up, there were some times where I could not fit it on my Watson table because of how it sprawled out. And it just was like, it was huge. It was huge. So just, just know that going into it. So the next one here, we're going to talk about like the gameplay, the mechanics, and just the card play, and the, all the combat stuff. Now the game has this really cool like card flipping mechanic. You've got your character cards, skill cards, weapon cards, and you're going to be flipping those up and down, back and forth, and activating different effects, putting tokens on them, exhausting them and different things, and sort of like configuring and building this little tableau of combos that each of your characters are going to do. And it's really, really neat. And the way that those tokens like interact with and affect your abilities is pretty cool, because like as you go through the campaign, you're going to add more skill cards and get other little cards and stuff like that, little armor cards and trinkets and potions. So adding more skills not only gives you more skills, but it gives you more room to put tokens on. So you can spend more exhaustion tokens, or if you get like some nasty effect on you, you can put more, you can spread those out a little bit more, which is a bad thing. But then you can also put more like focus tokens and reroll tokens and flip tokens and all these things like that allow you to reroll dice or flip your cards for free. And so it kind of opens up your space in terms of what you can do. So that's a cool mechanic there, where you get like the skill plus, hey, you get a little extra room to do more stuff with that card. You can spend more exhaustion tokens over here. And your actions in the game are like, move and attack and stuff. Well, one of the actions is you can flip a card. And so that's like preparing. And then so you can switch weapons. You go from like a ranged weapon to a melee weapon, or you flip your character card and it's like a whole new ability, like a whole new, not a stance, but a whole kind of different take on your combat. And so that's really neat. Now I will say, it's like there isn't quite enough of variety in terms of the asymmetry across the different characters. And when you play through the app, you're going to end up using all the characters, no matter how many players you're playing with. To me, there's like, I don't know, it's hard to say this as a nit. I could see others having this as a nitpick or criticism. To me, it was fine. I thought it was, the variety across the characters was just about right, but it is a little samey. It wasn't samey to the point of like I'm bored or anything. It was just like, well, I've seen like a game like Alter Quest, for example. It's just the difference between the different characters is a little bit more stark, and so I kind of have to compare it to that. But to me, it was enough different. There was enough kind of different things, and the roles and things that they served were different enough. Like you got your tank and you got your healer types and your more squishy damage dealers and stuff like that. And so from that sort of conceptual perspective, they are different enough, but like the actual physical mechanics of doing certain things wasn't quite different enough for me to really kind of call it out. So it was just like a little bit samey there. And I don't know, I was just thinking, well, if I look at like games like, Warhammer Quest or Shadows of Brimstone, something like their mechanics across characters is not really different at all, and I really like those games. So to me, it's different enough. But I could see after playing games like Alter Quest and some other games like that, you can say, well, it's not quite as, evolved as it could be. But to me, that would be a big nitpick. But I could see some other people that are more mechanics driven kind of citing that out. But I really enjoyed it. It was very tactical and very, very fun and engaging all the way through each of the different adventures. Now, speaking of the characters, I want to talk about the character development, like the progression, the leveling up, and all that stuff. But first, I want to talk about the story side of it, because as the story sort of unfolds from the beginning all the way to the end of the campaign, each character has their own kind of special piece of the adventure of the story. They have their own kind of input. And I thought that was really neat. Like there's no like one messianic savior character, really. Now there's some characters which you might look in the political landscape and say they're kind of the more important person. But the team really kind of comes together over the course of the campaign, and they each have their own kind of invested interest in all of the stuff that's going on in the world itself and over the course of the adventure and what they can contribute and all that kind of stuff. Amazing. I mean, that's just, again, going back to point number one, I'm like, this is a special game, right? Because of this kind of stuff. And like I said, your personality, your kind of moral choices do matter. They do crop up back probably in like the last quarter, last third of the campaign. So those really come up. And I'm going to kind of circle around a little bit here. So there's a little bit kind of a strangeness with the progression though, in terms of like leveling up skills and getting new weapons and stuff like that. Like there's a ton to it, but then I like didn't touch a lot of it either. And the way that you get skills is a little bit strange, a little bit on rails in some ways. But I think if I were to play it again, it might be different a little bit. So I'll have more to say on that point. But I think if you were to sit down and play it through, and I've talked to some other folks here, and they said, yeah, it's like you level up and stuff. And then once you get to like a certain part of the game, it's like you don't really develop too much in terms of your skills and that kind of thing anymore. And it's like, why didn't I get access to this or that? And so maybe there's some randomness involved, or maybe it's like there's cards in the box that are probably going to come up more in the expansion or something. But there was like a lot I didn't get to, which is actually not a bad thing, but it just felt like, I didn't really get much choice here in terms of what I could, sort of go up or down my tech tree with my characters. It wasn't none, but it was just, it seems like that part was a little bit soft. I'll talk about this point here, and then another point when we talk about crafting. Each of the characters has these thing called feats. And so you actually control these in the app itself. And what happens is when your character does a certain special type of action, it's like a little, like a little sub quest or personal quest in a way. It's like when I go into a scenario, I want to be doing these kinds of things with this character, and that will unlock other things. And so maybe some of this, development is triggered by these feats and me choosing different feats. Because after you complete one feat, you get a little bonus. It might be item stuff, or it might be a skill, or it might be all kind of materials or something. And then you choose from one or two feats, and then you go to that one, and then you've got to sort of do the actions to finish that. And then you go in there, and then you do it, and you keep doing these different feats. So if you play certain characters more than others, they're going to kind of level up a little bit, sort of not on par with the others, which is fine. It's not a big deal, because the game does take steps to kind of level everybody up as a whole overall, so kind of generally. But definitely if you spend more time on one character, they're going to do more feats and stuff like that. Now the thing with that is that's all controlled in the app, so you kind of have to kind of remind yourself to go in and look at it. There's a little button at the bottom that will sort of faintly light up yellow, because I think I've done like a whole scenario and I was like, oh, I should have clicked a button and then leveled up the feeds. I mean, I should have like made a noise or something and would like annoyed you till you clicked it and then selected your next feat. But you have to go in there, and when you're playing with other players and stuff, you probably won't even notice it at all, because I did play it solo and with other people. But it's a really cool thing. It's just a nice aspect of it. But we'll talk more about like development, game-wise in a minute. So that's the character development. Again, the stories stuff is just out of this world. Now, the next piece, we're going to talk about the price. Because I looked at the price and I was like, 180, 170, 180. Now, you can get it discounts online. My local store does discounts. I've seen like 140 to 150. So, I mean, it's 20, 30 bucks cheaper. That's nothing to sneeze at. But I think 1 billion% this is the price it should be, especially at like a 140 or 150. Now, you can compare it, and I've read some stuff online where like, well, it's not fair to compare it to a Kickstarter project that has, like a billion minis or whatever and stretch goals. 1 billion% it's good you should compare it to a Kickstarter, because this blows 98.78% of Kickstarters out of the water, probably 99.999% Kickstarters out of the water. Because this is a ground up risk of a project. This is a risk. This is a new innovation. This is what Kickstarter should be for, right? This probably could have been on Kickstarter, because it's got an app. It's got this crazy box. I mean, it comes with the storage solution, which is often a stretch goal of a Kickstarter. Usually you get a Kickstarter, you get this, and you get these stretch goals, and you got to pay extra add-on, 20, 30, 40 bucks for the little storage solution. This comes with it. So if it's at 150, knock down 30 for the storage solution. And hey, I don't make the rules. So now you're looking at like, just over 100 bucks. Okay. But you've got the terrain stuff, you've got the app stuff, you've got all the story stuff, you've got the cool miniatures, very, very good, high quality miniatures, probably the absolute best that Fantasy Flight's ever done. Games Workshop level, pretty close. Pretty close. To me, 140, 150 bucks, no brainer, piece of cake. If this is something that looks like you will enjoy, of course. If you don't look like you enjoy it, then why would you pay that? I don't really have a bad point to this, because to me the price is what it should be. It's 100% worth it. Now the MSRP, 180, like 170, I'm like, ooh, that's steep. But you can get it for a discount. And you could probably skip a Kickstarter or something, or not buy 2 games, and then save up for this over the course of 2 months. I mean, that's okay. Save up money for a game, because this is worth saving your money for, if this is your kind of game. So I think the price is 100% appropriate. And it's a deal. It's really a steal. I did 26 hours of this, and we'll talk more about this in another point, but I would play it again. I would play through this again. All right, that's the price. Next thing, circling back to kind of point number 1, is the world building. And I made this kind of point earlier. I shouldn't have done it. I got a little carried away. But that meaningless stuff that I talked about before, like I said, that really helps the world building. There's a handful of side quests. I think there's only 2 kind of real side quests, but it could be just the way I went through the campaign. But there's other like events and things that happen that are sort of like side events and tie back into the main, quests and dungeon dives and whatnot you're going to go on. And then there's a little kind of random encounters as you travel along the map and all that kind of stuff. And those feel more or less meaningless. But again, after finishing the campaign, you're like, oh, okay, now I have a real sense for this world and this kind of universe that these folks are creating. And I think that's an important part of this, because it just really adds to the immersion, the sort of compassion that you feel for not just your characters but some of the NPCs and some of the events and things that happen, because it really grounds it. All this kind of little world building details really ground it. And I'm going to talk about this again in the final thoughts. I think it really helps the game. And I will say it's nice, because I've kind of seen them over the last couple of years try to set Tyranoth apart. Because, the original Descent games, the Runebound, Battle Lore, that kind of stuff, it's just kind of like a Warhammer Fantasy knockoff kind of thing, right? Or Tolkien-esque. But I found it more like old school. It's like old school Warhammer Fantasy without the kind of the edginess crap, and less funny too than Warhammer Fantasy used to be. So they've really kind of taken some steps here to set their races and their people and the sort of the personalities and stuff apart. Legacy of Dragonholt, which is a game I think I reviewed that. I like that one. Okay, it was pretty good, and I really like the world building in that. And they really kind of build up a little bit more on top of that. So that's good. It's kind of setting it apart, and there's some interesting dynamics here between, you know, some of the different typical race relations and stuff like that. You know, it mixes it up. It doesn't really phone it in that regard. So I just wanted to call that out a little bit. Now the next part is crafting. And I think this is where a lot of the replayability, which is my next point, is going to come into, because the crafting in the app interface is really, really neat, and it's fun to sit there even with people and kind of quibble about how you want to sort of upgrade and tweak different weapons and which recipes you want to craft. Because think of it like if you played like Diablo or World of Warcraft or those kind of games where you have like little sockets and you can add like little procs and stuff to your different weapons or choose your different weapons once you unlock those. That's a really, really fun thing to kind of tinker around, and you get the resources and materials just kind of come to you just over the course of game, just by opening chests and running into random events. You just kind of get resources thrown at you, which is fine. You just get like a bunch of crap. And then you can sit down and, you know, sit there and tinker. And I've sat there, you know, for a while and been like, okay, so what, do I want like the 5% chance to double my damage, or do I want the 25%, you know, chance to, I don't know, stun the enemy or something, right? So you can go tweak or, you know, proc an extra action for another hero. There's all kinds of little weird things that you can go in there and do. And the interface is pretty good. It's a little bit unclear at first, and I think I probably had played through almost half a dozen quests before I figured out, okay, this is a recipe, this does that. And then if I do this, oh, here's how I switch a weapon, you know. And so it could have been a little bit better introduction there. And I would just probably suggest, if you're coming at this new, spend some time with that interface to kind of figure out what does what. And probably go on Board Game Geek and stuff and, you know, ask questions about it. Because I've definitely seen other people kind of struggle with that at the beginning. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do now? Do I craft these? Can I take these with me? This, you know, what does this do? It's not terrible. Like, you can just kind of go and click around and you'll stumble your way right to there. And the app sort of just takes all that in its brain, right? And then applies it. So you don't have to track all of that stuff, because it gets pretty like fine-grained between each character's two weapons, and each weapon has 2 slots, and you can pick like, I think I got up to 4 on one of the weapons, like 4 different things I could put in this one slot on the weapon, and then 2 or 3 on the others. Most of them I got up to 2 or 3 different ones. So you're looking at like, you know, 4 to 6, 7, 8 options for one weapon for one character, and they each have 2 weapons. So you can play around with that. But it's really a neat thing, and this is really something that, you know, I mean, obviously, we've never seen this in a board game. So other than like a little stumbling block there with the app UI, it's such a cool thing. And I think the replayability is going to come into this whole like item bit, because there's so many weapons and stuff that I was like, I haven't seen any of these. Like and I finished the thing. I'm like, I did everything I think I could possibly do, every little side quest and everything, and I didn't see any of these weapons. And, you know, where did these come from? And maybe I didn't like open the right treasure chest or something, but it is random too. I've seen online where people go, well, I opened that chest, completely different result. Probably based on who opens it and how successful you were and what skill you used to open it, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so that's crafting. Really neat. I mean, it's very innovative. It's a very, very cool, different thing that we haven't seen really in a tabletop game. All right, so last 2 points here. Number 9, replayability. Now, as I said a couple of points back, I really want to play this again. I played through it mostly solo. Took 26 hours. I played one scenario with 2 friends of mine, so we played like a 3-player game. The rest of it was all solo, and I fully regret soloing it all the way, because this is an experience I wish I should have just had with some friends of mine, because it's just really that fun. Now, what I would do next time is, and this is the tricky part of it, is I think the trickiness of reading some of the stuff is going to kind of affect that, because I really want to like spend a little bit more time reading and not necessarily blowing through, because some of the dialogues I was like, okay, yeah, okay, got it. Not too much, but there are certain points where I just kind of knew the outcome of the dialogue just because, you know, I don't know, I'm 45, so I've read stories before. Anyway, so, and if I was sitting there with a group of people, I am of the mind that I want to play it with people, but I also don't want to sit there and do the whole reading thing. So if they did a voiceover, then 1,000% I would do this. But I also want to play it again to kind of take my time with the story, because I was really excited during the course of this play to get into the next scenario and get into the fun combat and setting up the terrain and seeing what kind of surprises this scenario is going to throw at me. And so part of me wasn't necessarily that I was like bored with the story, obviously, because I've just been raving about it for I don't know how long, but I really wanted to get to the next piece to see what happened. So I'm of a dual mind there. I want to play it again with people, and I want to play it a little bit slower through the story again, just kind of like take it in, because I really did enjoy it. And then I also want to kind of crank up the difficulty level, because I played on just the standard difficulty level, and I lost 3 out of like the 15 or 16. Now 2 of them were because I was doing something wrong. One of them I straight lost because just, I don't know. I think you might be supposed to lose it. I don't know. I don't want to spoil anything, because there's one there I'm like, I don't know how you would ever win this, and I feel like you should never win it because of the way the story went. Although, if you did win it, I mean, it's not like it's not winnable, but it was just really hard. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe you're supposed to lose it, and it's part of the deal. But I was like, oh no, because the way the tone changes if you lose a scenario versus the next one, so you just kind of like keep going in the story, but it'll change up the tone and the way the dialogue a little bit, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, I technically only lost, I technically lost 3, but I really should only lost 1 scenario because I realized I was doing the ability dice wrong, and I was like, oh, okay, the ability test thing, it's a thing. So I was like, well, if I did that, 1,000% I would have won both those scenarios, because I almost beat him anyway, but playing on ultra hard mode that I shouldn't have been doing. But I really want to ramp up the difficulty level a little bit too. Now, the other problem with this in terms of replayability is that that idea is not going to be for everybody wanting to play the same story again. I would really like it if they did a sandboxy kind of mode like some of these guys back here, these Warhammer Quest games or Shadows of Brimstone, because this system here, like overlaid a kind of like roguelike, kind of infinite progression, procedurally generated sort of campaign thing where you just, you focused on leveling up your characters, not so much on like a concrete story. I think that would be really neat. I mean, as much as I've raved about the story, to sort of apply this system to that kind of thing and just make the monsters progressively harder, just try to level up your guys and just do that whole dungeon crawl kind of thing driven through the app with the mechanics and all that stuff. I think that could be really neat. But yeah, that's just a personal thing. I like those sandboxy kind of games, like Brimstone and Warhammer Quest games. That would be neat. So that would make that would take the replayability question kind of out of the picture. And I really think they would be cool to do, really go in for that. But I don't think that they will, but I think that's like the crown jewel of a game I'm looking for with this kind of experience in terms of the presentation and everything and some of the stuff the app can do. I think that'd be sweet to have this like infinite mode where you just keep playing and level up your characters and get access to all the items and stuff. That'd be cool. All right, so that's replayability. Number 10 would be, let's compare this to other dungeon crawls, which I just kind of did. So if we compared this to Descent 2nd Edition, Descent 2nd Edition is a tiny baby compared to this game. And I throw Imperial Assault in there, and I've still got Imperial Assault at the top of the shelf there. There's no reason to have games like that anymore because Imperial Assault, which I played all the way through, and I played a chunk through Descent, and I also played Descent's app version, with Road to Legend or whatever, which is terrible. honestly got terrible compared to this app. I would say playing through that kind of story-driven campaign like Imperial Assault or Descent 2, where you go through and there's a DM and you go through missions and you maybe do little side missions and stuff like that, just awful compared to playing through this. We finished Imperial Assault, and by the end of that, I was like, I think I kind of hate this. Now, I love Imperial Assault, still have it for the skirmish mode and that kind of thing. But the way that you kind of go through a story, and this would go back to like the original Hero Quest game, where you have the DM and other players. Having the DM be in the app itself, fantastic. The way that it can present the story to you, some of the things that they can do. This to me just kind of fixes over that style of gameplay, that kind of old school Hero Quest Descent style gameplay. Now there's other games, like you got your Alter Quest, which to me, in terms of the card mechanics and everything, Alter Quest is my favorite dungeon crawl in terms of just pure like gameplay, board game mechanics. So this kind of gets close to that, but I still got to give the nod to Alter Quest. Gloomhaven, I would probably have to give a little bit of a nod to there. But then, like I talked about the sandboxy stuff, the replayability, that is my jam. Like that's my thing. Brimstone, the old Warhammer Quest, that stuff is just really, really cool, and that's kind of my jam. So that kind of comparison, if you want something that is, not going to be linear, then this isn't really going to be for you, because you're going to play through the story, and most people, I think, won't want to play through it again. I will, but on hard mode and all this stuff, like I said. But, to me, though, this sits in its like own kind of weird space, too. So anyway, my only kind of thing with that would be, like, it'd be cool if they had the other mode, which I already talked about. So that's kind of the top 10 things that I wanted to kind of talk around both sides of. I don't have much else to say, although I think, like I said, really comes back to the price side of it in terms of my final thoughts of, hey, if you can pick this up for, let's say $140, $150, and you think about this in comparison to a Kickstarter that kind of sucks or is like okay, this is what Kickstarter should have been for, and what a Kickstarter game, what it would be is. But the thing is, this is so well developed and polished, and just there's so many facets. Like I feel like this game was made by, okay, well, let's talk about the designers here. Kara Sentil Dunk and Nathan Hajek. I don't know who those people are. This game can't have just been designed by those two people, though. Like there was a complete, from the bottom up design, from this whole product, for all the different pieces, the folks that developed and designed the app, that wrote the code, whoever came up with the punch boards for the terrain, and all that fun stuff. And the way that the game design marries with the story, all this kind of stuff that I've talked about for the last probably 30 or 40 minutes. This is just such like a beautiful achievement and an innovation. And I don't know if this will be my game of the year, but it's going to be right at the top. Right at the top. The only reason it would not be my number one game of the year is just from like my personal sort of taste of, if I sit down to play a game, I'd probably rather play, this game or that game, or this style of game or that style of game. But like, I think for me, sort of, if I look at myself objectively, not objectively for everybody, obviously, but myself objectively, this is the best game I played probably a long time, like years. There you go. Get it, recommend, up and down, whenever. You can hate me if you don't like it. It's great.